My name is Yudo Sakamoto, and I'm a contract worker, just one of the countless nameless faces trying to survive in Tokyo's endless concrete sprawl. I'm 26, single, and barely keeping my head above water. Life hadn't been particularly cruel to me, but it hadn't been kind either. I lived alone in a tiny one-room apartment, with paper-thin walls and a leaky faucet that had been dripping since the day I moved in. I work for a mid-sized logistics company called Shuriken Express, mostly doing desk work and managing shipping schedules. It wasn't glamorous, and it sure wasn't stable. Every 6 months, I'd wait for the HR email telling me whether my contract would be renewed or not. Most days, I kept my head down, avoided office politics, and did my job as quietly as possible.
And then came her, Masaki Tendo, my boss.
She was beautiful. Not just in the conventional sense, though she had the kind of elegance that made heads turn in the office, but in the way she carried herself. Poised, calm, and fiercely competent, Masaki was the kind of woman you couldn't ignore. In meetings, her words had weight. In silence, she commanded attention. She was a department manager at just 29, and even the senior execs gave her the kind of respect you rarely saw given to someone so young. So imagine my shock when one rainy Thursday evening, as I was about to clock out, my work phone buzzed with a call from her.
Yudo-kun, are you free to talk?
That was the first time she'd ever called me outside of work hours. I nervously stepped into the stairwell and answered.
Yes, Tendo-san. What's going on?
There was a pause. I could hear soft jazz play in the background, as if she were at a cafe, or maybe home. I have an offer for you. Something unusual, personal even. My heart skipped a beat. Was she about to fire me personally? No, that didn't make sense. My younger sister, Ayika, she's recovering from surgery and needs someone to stay at the house while I'm away for business. It's complicated, and I don't trust random agencies. You're quiet, responsible, and you mind your own business. I'll pay you extra to live with us temporarily. Just help out where needed. I didn't know what to say. I had no experience as a live-in helper, and the thought of living with my boss, even temporarily, felt surreal.
I'm not sure I'm the right person.
I'll double your current contract pay for the duration, she added calmly. Plus room and board. Think about it.
I did more than think. I packed my bags that very night.
Masaki's home wasn't what I expected. Tucked into a quiet, upscale neighborhood in Setagaya, the house looked more like something out of an architectural magazine than a place someone my age and pay grade would ever step foot in. It was sleek and modern, full of clean lines, wooden accents, and glass walls that welcomed the morning sun like an old friend. "Welcome," Masaki said, holding the front door open as I awkwardly stood with my duffel bag in hand. She was dressed casually that day, hair tied up, no makeup, yet she still looked like she stepped off the cover of a lifestyle magazine. "Let me show you around." The house was spacious but warm. Minimalist decor, but every detail seemed intentional. A small bookshelf with literary classics, a piano in the corner, untouched but polished, and finally a spiral staircase leading to the upper floor where I would sleep. "You'll stay in the guest room just across from Ayaka's," she said as we climbed the stairs. "She's resting today, so try not to be too loud. Don't worry, she's not the type to bite."
That turned out to be a lie.
The first time I met Ayaka Tendo, she didn't even bother to look at me. I knocked gently on her door to deliver a tray of soup Masaki had prepared, but when she opened it, her eyes flicked past me like I wasn't there. She was nothing like Masaki. Where Masaki was composed and elegant, Ayaka radiated indifference and a quiet hostility I couldn't place. She was beautiful, too, but in a disheveled, haunting way. Pale skin, long, jet-black hair that hung messily around her face, and eyes that looked like they hadn't known joy in a long time. "I didn't ask for this," she muttered as she took the tray. "You don't need to pretend."
That was the first full sentence she said to me.
Over the next few days, I did my best to follow Masaki's instructions, prepare light meals, make sure Ayaka took her medication, and keep her company if she felt up to it. She never did. Most of the time, she stayed in her room, curtains drawn, headphones in, eyes fixed on a book or her phone. I felt like a ghost wandering someone else's life. Misaki, meanwhile, was in and out. Her job required frequent travel, and within the first 2 weeks, she was gone for almost 10 days straight. She just needs time, Misaki told me over the phone. Ayaka's complicated, but she's not a bad person. I wanted to believe that, but the silence in that house started to wear on me. There was no television, no music, just long stretches of quiet, punctuated by the occasional clink of a spoon or the soft thud of Ayaka's door closing.
Then one night everything changed.
It was around 1 a.m. I couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs to grab a glass of water. On my way back up, I passed Ayaka's room and heard something strange.
Crying.
Not loud or dramatic, just a soft, broken sound, like someone trying desperately not to be heard. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. Knock? Walk away?
I didn't either.
I waited. Maybe it was 5 seconds, maybe 15. Then suddenly the crying stopped and I heard a voice.
No, I said no.
It was sharp, angry, but there was no one else there. A chill ran down my spine. I crept back to my room, trying not to make a sound. I lay in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I should say something to Misaki. The next morning, Ayaka was silent as ever, sitting at the table with a bowl of untouched porridge. Her eyes were red, but not from sleep. "You don't need to play the caretaker," she said without looking up. "I know why you're really here."
But
She gave me a cold smile. "She sent you to spy on me, to make sure I don't break again. Don't bother pretending otherwise." I was stunned. I don't know what you mean. Misaki-san just wanted me to help while...
she wanted to control me. Like always.
She stood up, and for the first time, I saw something beyond the indifference.
I'm not her puppet. And just like that, she walked away. Later that day, I finally worked up the nerve to ask Misaki about it during our call.
"She said you're spying on her," I told her hesitantly. "That she feels like you're controlling her."
There was silence on the line. She said that? And yes.
Misaki exhaled slowly. "I was afraid of this. Yudo, I didn't want to put this burden on you, but Ayaka was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder 2 years ago. After our parents died, she spiraled. Hospitalized herself twice. I've been doing my best to help her, but I can't be here all the time."
I sat there in stunned silence.
"She's not dangerous," Misaki added quickly. "But she's deeply distrustful, paranoid at times. I hoped you could be a calming presence." I wasn't sure what I felt. Guilt? Confusion? Fear? "She's my sister," Misaki continued. "But sometimes I wonder if she even wants to get better." That night, as I sat on the balcony looking out over the city lights, I realized something. I was in over my head. What started as a temporary job had turned into something far more complicated and potentially dangerous. Ayaka wasn't just a troubled girl recovering from surgery. She was a wounded soul trapped in a web of pain, secrets, and something else I couldn't quite name.
And I had just stepped straight into the middle of it.
The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope stretched over a pit of broken glass. Misaki was away again, and I was left alone in the house with Ayaka, whose mood shifted like the weather, calm one moment, stormy the next. She barely spoke to me unless it was to snap. I tried to give her space, cook her meals, clean quietly, and never intrude. But the tension never left. It sat between us at breakfast, hummed under her footsteps in the hallway, and filled the air every time I knocked on her door to remind her about her medication.
But then something changed.
It was a Tuesday afternoon. The rain had started to fall, soft and persistent. I was vacuuming the hallway when I heard a faint thud from Ayaka's room, and another. It wasn't loud, but something about the sound chilled me.
I knocked on her door. "Ayaka-san? Everything okay?" No response. I knocked again. Still silence.
I hesitated. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but the sound wasn't normal. My fingers tightened around the doorknob. I turned it, unlocked. Slowly, I opened the door and peeked inside. She was on the floor, tangled in her bedsheets, her phone lying a few inches from her hand. "Ayaka!" I rushed in and crouched next to her. She stirred, blinking slowly. Her skin looked paler than usual, her breath shallow.
"I forgot to eat," she mumbled.
I helped her sit up, grabbing a pillow to prop her against the bed. "You haven't eaten since yesterday's toast," I said, voice tight with worry. "Did you take your meds?"
She shook her head. Didn't want to. That was the first real conversation we'd had in over a week.
"I'm not here to spy on you," I said quietly. "Misaki didn't give me some secret report to fill out. I'm just here to help. That's all." She looked at me. Not through me, at me. Her expression was unreadable. I didn't have a good answer. I could have lied. Told her it was just the money. That I needed the job. But what came out surprised even me.
"Because you remind me of my sister." Ayaka blinked.
"She passed away when I was 16, I continued. Same kind of eyes. Same way of shutting everyone out."
A long pause. "I don't hate you," she whispered.
That was all she said before I helped her back into bed and brought her a bowl of porridge. But something shifted that day. She started talking, slowly at first, then more often. Tiny comments. Quiet sarcasm. The occasional smirk. One evening, she asked me to join her in the living room while she watched an old samurai movie. Another night, she showed me a sketch she'd drawn. Delicate pencil lines of an abstract woman, face half shattered. It was haunting and beautiful. "You drew this?" I asked, genuinely stunned. She nodded. "Used to want to be a concept artist." "What happened?" She didn't answer. But the silence wasn't angry this time. It was heavy, full of things left unsaid. Then came the night that changed everything. It was past midnight. Misaki had returned from her trip and was in her room downstairs. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up when I heard faint voices, heated, muffled, coming from a hallway. Curious, I tiptoed toward the staircase and paused halfway down. That's when I heard Ayaka's voice, sharper than usual. "You're lying again, Misaki. You always lie." "I'm not lying, Ayaka. He doesn't know anything." "You're using him, just like you use me." There was a pause, followed by Misaki's strained whisper. "That's not fair." "No, what's not fair is locking me away in this house and calling it care. You just don't want anyone to know what really happened. I'm trying to protect you. From the truth." Ayaka laughed bitterly. "Or from the guilt?" I quietly backed up the stairs, heart pounding. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, replaying their conversation over and over. What truth was Ayaka talking about? What guilt? What didn't I know? The next morning, everything seemed normal. Misaki made breakfast. Ayaka was quiet again. But the tension was back, worse than before. 2 days later, I found it. It was an accident. I was looking for a spare towel in a hallway cabinet when I noticed a box pushed deep into the back. Curious, I pulled it out. Inside were hospital reports, prescriptions, and a few old photos. Most were labeled with Ayaka's name. I didn't mean to pry, but one sheet caught my eye. Incident report, Shinjuku General Hospital. Involuntary admission. I froze. The report listed Ayaka as a potential harm to self and others after an episode that required emergency intervention. Another document mentioned a car accident, one that had resulted in someone being seriously injured. The signature at the bottom? Misaki Tendo. Before I could process it, I heard footsteps behind me. You found it, Ayaka said, voice low. I turned slowly. She was standing at the end of the hallway, arms crossed, but her eyes weren't angry. They were tired. I wasn't supposed to see this, was I? I asked. She shook her head. Misaki kept it hidden. She thinks shielding me from everything will fix me. What happened in the accident? She walked past me, sat on the floor, and pulled one photo from the box. It showed the three of them, Ayaka, Misaki, and their mother, at a park. I was driving. I wasn't supposed to. I didn't have a license. Misaki had been fighting with our mom all week. That night, I took the car. A long breath. I didn't crash it. She did. But she told the police it was me. My chest tightened. What? She said it was to protect me. I was already mentally unstable. She claimed it would be easier to explain if I was the one driving. I sat down across from her, stunned. I've lived with that guilt for years, she whispered. Because even if she lied to protect herself, part of me thinks I deserve it anyway. Silence filled the hallway. I thought she was a perfect sister. I finally said, She's not, Ayaka replied. She's just a scared girl hiding behind a strong mask. That night, I realized I hadn't just walked into a broken household. I'd walked into a house built on secrets. And one way or another, they were going to come out. It was a quiet Sunday morning when everything finally came to a head. Misaki was supposed to be out on another business trip, but her bag still sat by the front door, untouched. I could feel the storm brewing. Ayaka hadn't come out of her room all morning, and I hadn't seen Misaki either. The silence was unbearable. I made tea just to do something with my hands, but the clinking of the spoon against the cup sounded too loud in the stillness. Finally, unable to sit with the tension any longer, I walked down the hallway to Misaki's room and knocked. She opened it almost instantly, like she'd been standing right behind the door. Yudo, she said softly. She looked tired, more tired than I'd ever seen her. Her usually pristine hair was unkempt, and she wore a look I couldn't read. Sadness? Dread? Can we talk? I asked. She stepped aside, letting me in. The room smelled like lavender and paperwork. Her suitcase was open on the bed, half packed, half forgotten. I found the box, I said plainly. The reports, the photos, the incident. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her face unreadable. I figured. Was it true? I asked. Everything Ayaka said? The accident? The lie? She looked at her hands. Yes. The weight of the word hit me harder than I expected. I panicked, she whispered. Our mother was in critical condition. The police were asking questions. Ayaka had already been hospitalized once, and I thought if they blamed her, they might be lenient. She'd get help instead of jail time. But she wasn't driving. No, she said. We'd argued. She begged me not to go out that night, said I was too upset. I ignored her. She tried to stop me, and I told her to shut up and get in the car if she was so worried. Her voice broke then. She was right. I ran a red light. I was so angry. I didn't see the other car. I sat down across from her. So you told everyone it was her. I thought I could fix it later. I told myself it was just for a while. But once the lie was out there, it took on a life of its own. Ayaka didn't argue. She thought maybe it was her fault too. I was stunned. You let her carry that guilt for years. I didn't know how to undo it, Misaki admitted, tears brimming in her eyes. I became her guardian. I poured everything into taking care of her, try and make up for it. But she always felt it. That weight. That's not care, I said quietly. That's control. You're trying to earn her forgiveness without ever asking for it. The words hung in the air like smoke. Suddenly, we both heard something, movement from the hallway. We stepped out and saw Ayaka standing there, barefoot, arms crossed, eyes red. You lied to him too, she said, voice shaking. Just like you lied to me. Ayaka, I heard everything, she snapped. You always decide for me. Always twist things to fit your perfect image. Even your guilt is about you. You're not sorry because you hurt me. You're sorry because you couldn't live with it. Misaki looked like she'd been slapped. That's not fair. It's exactly fair. Ayaka shouted, then turned to me. You think you're helping, Yudo? You're not. You're just another person who looks at me like I'm broken, like I need to be fixed. I don't think you're broken, I said gently, but I do think you're in pain. And I think that pain has been twisted around so many lies you don't know where it ends anymore. Ayaka's shoulders shook. I never wanted this life. I know, Misaki whispered, and I'm sorry. Truly, I don't know how to fix what I broke. You can't, Ayaka said, tears finally falling. But maybe if you had just told the truth back then, I could have healed. Silence. I'll go, I said after a long pause. You two need space. I shouldn't be here right now. But as I turned, Ayaka spoke again. Wait. I looked back. I don't want you to leave, she said. Not yet. I nodded. Later that day, the three of us sat at the dining table, like people who had just survived an earthquake. Everything was fragile, broken, yet somehow still standing. Misaki didn't say much. She just sat there, staring into her tea like it held the answer to the years of guilt and silence. Ayaka didn't yell anymore. She just looked tired. I don't hate you, Ayaka said quietly to her sister. Misaki looked up, surprised. But I don't forgive you yet either, she added. And I don't know when I will. I don't expect you to, Misaki whispered. But I'll be here when you're ready. It wasn't a resolution. Not really. But it was a beginning. A few weeks passed. The household changed. Subtly, quietly, but undeniably. The silence was no longer sharp. It was soft, contemplative. Tension still lingered, but now it shared space with something else. Honesty. Misaki cut back on her travel. She started working from home more often, sometimes canceling meetings just to make dinner. She didn't overcompensate or force herself into Ayaka's space, but she was there, present, trying not to control, but to listen. And Ayaka, she started coming out of her room more often. She didn't slam doors anymore. She even asked me, once, to go with her on a short walk to the neighborhood park. We walked in silence, watching the leaves turn gold and red with the coming autumn. She didn't say much, but I could tell. This was her way of rebuilding, step by slow, deliberate step. One afternoon, I found her sketching again. The same abstract figure she'd shown me before, only this time the lines were softer. The cracks in the face still remained, but they curved differently now, as if they were part of the design instead of flaws to be hidden. I'm going to submit this to a digital art contest, she said, not looking up from the paper. I blinked. Really? She nodded. It's time I start doing things for myself again, even if I don't win. That's amazing, I said, and I meant it. That night, while I was drying the dishes, Misaki approached me in the kitchen. Her expression was gentle, though a bit hesitant. She's different now, she said, eyes watching her sister from afar as Ayaka sat on the porch with a sketchbook in her lap. She's healing, I replied. You help with that. I shook my head. She did it herself. She just needed someone to see her for who she is, not who they're afraid she'll become. Misaki leaned against the counter. I've been thinking, she began, about letting her live on her own. Maybe not immediately, but she deserves her own life, her own choices, even if I'm scared. That's the most loving thing you can do, I said. She smiled faintly. You've taught me a lot, Yudo, and not just about Ayaka. I felt heat rise to my face. I just did what felt right. Misaki reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope. This is your final payment, she said. Our contract was 3 months, and you stayed longer than you were supposed to. I took the envelope, the weight of it heavier than just money. So, I should leave? That's up to you. I looked at the window. Ayaka had started laughing quietly at something on her phone. The sound was light, carefree. I'll go, I said after a moment, but not because I want to, because I think it's time you two build this next part of your life together. Misaki nodded. Then let's not say goodbye. Just see you later. I packed my things the next morning. Ayaka didn't say much when I told her I was leaving. She just stood by the front door, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But as I stepped out, she called out to me, "Yudo." I turned. "I'm glad you peeked," she said, a mischievous glint in her eye. I grinned. "Me too." She reached into her pocket and handed me a folded piece of paper. Inside was a copy of her latest sketch, a new one. It was a picture of three figures sitting under a cherry blossom tree. One looked like Masaki. One looked like Ayaka. The third had messy hair, a crooked smile, and an apron tied awkwardly around his waist. "Don't get a big head about it," she muttered. I chuckled and tucked it into my bag. As I walked away from the house, the wind picked up, scattering a few cherry blossom petals that had stubbornly clung to the tree by the gate. I paused, looking back one last time. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel like a place of sadness. It felt like a home. It's true that a term that is seen as offensive in one culture may be quite normal in another. Depending on how you say it, even a phrase like loser dad might seem sort of cute. I lost my wife in a vehicle accident when my daughter was still very young, and I was devastated. I got myself out of that rut, quit freelancing to steady my income, launched my own business, and have continued ever since for the sake of my daughter. My daughter started working as a teacher and starting her own life a few years ago. She is now getting married at last. Although his father is a senior executive at a large bank and an elitist who despises people like me who run startups, the man she is marrying is extremely courteous and respectful. In order to avoid causing any issues for my daughter's marriage, I made every effort to keep a positive connection with this father-in-law. However, despite my best efforts to accommodate him, he was never content. He made a stupid joke at the wedding reception by putting "loser dad" on my name tag. For the sake of my daughter and her husband, I stopped holding back after that embarrassing reception and faced him head on. Given his exaggerated sense of elitism and disdain for new business owners like me, it was time for him to own up to the repeated insults he directed at me. I am Stephen Mitchell, and I am the founder of an IT startup. At the age of 30, I started business at a period when internet access was expanding across the nation. During that time, there was a huge need for system engineers, and my company was able to successfully ride that wave. In the 20 years since then, there have been significant changes in the IT sector. Nearly 80% of the nation's population now owns a cell phone, and even elderly individuals use social media and texting apps on a daily basis. A never-ending cycle of change resulted from the way lives change, which in turn led to new developments in IT. It was never easy to keep up with these quick changes, but I decided against expanding my business mindlessly. In order to adjust to the changing business, I instead used a selective small team method with only the most skilled people. Many others were establishing their own businesses at the same time I did, but the majority of them have since filed for bankruptcy or withdrawn from operations. However, my business has persevered through those difficult times and is still in operation now. It may come across as a little arrogant, but I think I had a talent for predicting the industry's trajectory and developing plans appropriately. I was a complete introvert while I was a student, spending all my time in my room playing games or working on programming. Neither I nor anybody else would have predicted that I would one day own my own business. I've always enjoyed serious thought, and I could lose myself for hours playing challenging puzzle games. Even though I didn't work very hard, I always got decent grades in science classes, which I enjoyed. On the other side, I detested loud social situations and was never very adept at sports. I never really stood out in the school's social structure and kept a low profile in class. Even though I was definitely close to the bottom, I never became angry about it or wanted to get higher. I just didn't enjoy going to school. I truly just wanted a place where I could think peacefully and unhindered. When I started university, I at last discovered that atmosphere. In contrast to high school, I could complete my degree at my scientific and engineering university as long as I got my credits and finished my graduation research. Regardless of attendance, some teachers even awarded credits if you performed well on tests. So I only went to class as much as necessary and spent the rest of my time learning programming on the university's high-performance computers. I didn't have a clear goal for what I wanted to do with this skill. I just found it thrilling to make a program behave exactly as I envisioned it in my head. I preferred working with computers over interacting with people. So naturally, I had very few friends, but I never felt lonely. Until high school, being around people who looked down on me was stressful. Getting away from that environment brought me a sense of relief because I could finally immerse myself in what I love without worrying about others. I had built enough skill by the time I graduated to be a valuable asset at any company. One of my professors was so impressed with my programming skills that several major companies offered to hire me if I would just go through the formality of an interview. But I had no desire to give up the quiet independence I enjoyed in university and return to the noisy, hierarchical environment I remembered from high school. At that time, remote work from home had not yet become widespread. Taking a job at a big company meant commuting every day. I couldn't see myself enduring life packed into crowded trains every morning and evening, working in a tall building full of complex human relationships. So in the end, I chose not to join any company and started working as a freelance programmer. In the beginning, my income was unstable, but in this field, performance speaks for itself. As long as I could demonstrate my ability, I had no trouble getting good-paying jobs. For the first few years after graduation, I worked alone. But one day I was asked to meet face-to-face with a representative from a company that regularly outsourced programming work to me. It was during that meeting that the person who appeared before me as the client representative would later become my wife. Though I had always struggled with social interaction, especially with women, our conversations were strictly about work and programming, which made it easy for me to talk to her. As we continued to meet for project discussions, I gradually stopped feeling the usual pressure to say the right thing around her, and I found myself able to speak naturally. She too preferred thoughtful conversation over smooth-talking men. So we connected well to our work, and before long we began spending time together even outside of our jobs. Since my student days, I resigned myself to the idea that I would probably go through life without ever forming a romantic relationship, and I had told my few close friends the same. That's why those friends were shocked when we got married just a year after meeting. But honestly, no one was more surprised than I was. Even after getting married, I didn't change my lifestyle as a freelance programmer. My wife left her job after we got married, but she used her experience in the IT industry to become my manager, helping me with my work. Thanks to her, I was freed from the burdens of sales, tax paperwork, and other time-consuming tasks, which allowed me to fully immerse myself in programming, and I began earning several times more than a typical corporate systems engineer. Not long after we had fully settled into our new life, we were blessed with a daughter. We named her Samantha. She grew up healthy without any major illnesses and eventually started elementary school. At that time, I truly believed that life was something that rewarded hard work. I had a sense of fulfillment I could never have imagined as a student, and I was more determined than ever to work hard and support my family. It wasn't long after that when I was struck by the most devastating moment of my life. One day, my wife was hit and killed by a car with faulty brakes while walking down the street. She was not only my wife and the one who managed everything about my work environment, but most importantly, she was Samantha's mother, and in an instant, she was gone. No amount of words could ever describe the shock and despair I felt at that time. The trauma was so intense that my memory became fragmented, and even now, I still cannot piece together the funeral events in proper order. I can recall certain images and phrases from that time, but I'm unable to follow the sequence or understand the connections. That's how completely shattered I was, unable to think clearly at all. The world before me felt meaningless, and I was close to forgetting why I was even alive. If it hadn't been for Samantha, I don't think I would have made it to age 50. Samantha, still in elementary school, was so shocked by losing her kind and loving mother that she stopped eating and had to be put on an IV drip at the hospital. When I saw Samantha lying weak and pale in that hospital bed, something stirred back to life inside me. My wife wasn't coming back. I had to finally accept that. As her father, how could I remain broken and hollow? If I were the only one suffering, I could wallow in it all I wanted. But now I was the only one who could support Samantha. That sudden wave of realization surged through me, and I began to pick myself up and move forward despite the grief. Sometimes I wonder if my wife, watching from heaven, gave me a final push, telling me to get it together and stand strong. In any case, from that moment on, I made it my life's goal to ensure that Samantha would have a bright and fulfilling life, and I resolved to do everything necessary to make that happen. The first step was returning to work. Until then, I had always waited for my wife to bring in the projects, but from now on, I would have to handle everything myself. Fortunately, the clients I had built trust with welcomed me back and began giving me assignments just like before. But no matter how motivated I was, there were only so many hours in a day. Handling all the non-programming tasks while also taking care of Samantha on my own quickly became overwhelming. Even losing a bit of sleep wasn't enough to keep up. If it were just a matter of getting by, we could have continued like that. But with Samantha growing up and future education expenses in mind, I knew I had to rethink my approach to work. I considered hiring a manager, but I knew no one could understand me and work with the same attention to detail my wife had, so I couldn't bring myself to go through with it. After struggling with these thoughts for some time, I finally decided at the age of 30 to start a company. I had no intention of creating a large corporation with many employees. I believed that if I could handpick a small team of people, I could communicate with effortlessly and form a highly profitable group of professionals. Even someone like me could make it work. So I began managing the company by trial and error, making many mistakes along the way, but steadily building a structure that suited me. I recruited a friend who had great people skills and excelled at sales, and I also hired and trained younger talent who could support my programming. Gradually, I expanded the company. 3 years after launching the business, we had grown to a team of 7, including myself, and had become recognized in the industry as a team of highly skilled professionals. By that time, Samantha had also recovered from her mother's death and was back to being her cheerful self, attending school with energy. By the time she entered junior high school, my company was able to collaborate with large corporations. Now, 20 years since I founded the company, it has grown into a comprehensive IT services firm that provides not only software development, but also hardware for network infrastructure as a package solution. We have 60 employees, not many for a company of our standing, but we remain firmly committed to a small elite team, and our members are incredibly talented and diverse. A few years ago, we started working with major companies on financial systems, and some of the advisors we brought in from securities firms and investment funds are now managing our corporate assets. Thinking back to how I once refused to join any company because I didn't want to deal with too many people, it's almost hard to believe the position I'm in now. Life truly is unpredictable. And all this began because after my wife passed away, I wanted to ensure I had the financial means to raise Samantha without compromise. As for Samantha, she found her calling during her student years and entered the Faculty of Education to become a teacher. She now works as an elementary school teacher, dedicating herself to her students. To the public, I am seen as a successful entrepreneur who built a highly profitable startup. But more than anything I achieved as a business owner, what I am most proud of is that I was able to fully support my daughter Samantha as her father until she realized her dream of becoming a teacher. Lately, my greatest concern had been Samantha's marriage. Shortly before graduating from university, Samantha had set her heart on a young man she wanted to marry in the future. His name was Tyler, a cheerful young man 4 years older than Samantha. Upon graduating, Samantha brought Tyler home and formally introduced him to me. Tyler had been raised in a well-off household, as his father was an executive at a major bank, and he carried a refined air about him that was immediately noticeable. Despite being raised under the guidance of such an elite father, Tyler showed no arrogance at all and treated me, Samantha's father, with the utmost respect. Just one look at the way they cared for each other, and I felt certain that Samantha would be happy with this young man. Since losing my wife, I had thrown myself into building a company to raise Samantha without compromise. Now that she had found a stable job doing what she loved and a dependable partner to share her life with, I felt that my own life had finally come full circle. That was the feeling I had. So, from the time I met Tyler, I simply wished for the day to come when Samantha could be married in peace, free from any trouble. Some might think it's an overreaction for a father to be so cautious before his daughter's wedding. But the truth is, I had one lingering concern. That concern was Tyler's father, Thomas. As a matter of fact, I had previously done business with the bank where Thomas served as an executive, and I was already somewhat familiar with who he was, even before Samantha introduced Tyler. My company had been planning to expand operations, and we had been negotiating financing with several major banks, including Thomas's. This expansion plan had been carefully developed over several years, and we were fully prepared. So rather than negotiate from scratch, I approached the banks with a firm proposal. Here is our business plan, and if you agree with it, this is the amount we'd like to borrow. I thought this approach would save time for both parties rather than wasting it haggling back and forth.
However, Thomas apparently saw my direct approach as presumptuous.
I don't care how well they're performing. Some upstart startup thinks it can throw terms at us and dictate the loan. That's the height of arrogance. That's what I heard Thomas had said in anger. Unless they show a willingness to significantly back down from these terms, don't bother dealing with them. It seemed my decision to present firm terms up front had offended Thomas's deep sense of elitism and his respect for hierarchy and formality. If I've angered a key decision-maker, we might not be able to secure funding from that bank anymore, I thought, and I decided not to push further. I prioritized not worsening the relationship. So, while I was still cautiously continuing negotiations, Samantha suddenly introduced Tyler, who is Thomas's son, as her fiancé. I was stunned by the coincidence. However, it had never even occurred to me to link business negotiations with Samantha's choice of a lifelong partner. Even if Thomas had taken a hard stance in our dealings, I never let that influence how I treated Tyler. As Samantha's father, I made a sincere effort to get to know Tyler and saw that he was earnest, principled, and genuinely cared for her. So it never once crossed my mind to oppose their marriage, and I intended to treat Thomas with the utmost respect as Samantha's future father-in-law. Naturally, Thomas must have realized I was the entrepreneur who had requested financing from his bank. But I believe that even if he felt resentment toward me as a businessman, he would act calmly and respectfully for his son's sake. Unfortunately, that hope was betrayed. During several wedding preparations, when we crossed paths, Thomas repeatedly took a condescending attitude toward me. "So, you're Samantha's father? The man who tried to squeeze absurdly generous loan conditions out of our bank is now to become Tyler's father-in-law. I find that rather hard to digest." That's how Thomas opened the conversation at the very first formal family meeting, freezing the room with tension.
Tyler, having apparently heard about me from his father beforehand, immediately cut in. "Dad, you promised you wouldn't bring that up today."
Thanks to him, things didn't escalate further. But every time Thomas gave me that cold, scrutinizing look, I couldn't help but feel shaken. Later at the engagement meeting, Thomas found a moment to speak with me alone. "I had always hoped Tyler would marry someone from a more respectable background," he began abruptly. "I see." When he first told me he wanted to marry Samantha, I tried to get him to reconsider, but he's as stubborn as I am. No matter what I said, he refused to treat his choice of a spouse like some part to be swapped out. So I gave in and let him go through with it. After meeting Samantha, I found her to be a fine young woman. I won't oppose the marriage any further.
"I truly appreciate your understanding. But just because I've accepted her doesn't mean I've accepted her father." "I understand."
"So you've started an IT company and somehow managed to keep it afloat. But your background is rather irregular, isn't it? When I first saw your alma mater, I didn't even recognize the name. Turns out it's ranked far below the top-tier universities I graduated from. Barely a mid-tier university." It's true that the university isn't widely known and offers fewer departments than elite institutions in the city, but it has excellent faculty in the sciences and has produced many skilled engineers. One of its researchers even gained international recognition recently.
"Oh, so are you trying to tell me you're one of those brilliant graduates I should be impressed by?"
No, that's not what I meant at all. I was only trying to explain how the university is viewed in the academic community. I see. So what you're implying is that I, a bank executive, wasn't even capable of researching that information on my own. I thought I had the ability to hold a position like mine, but I suppose to a hotshot startup founder like you, I must seem like nothing more than an incompetent old man. How humbling? Please wait. I don't see you that way at all. We are about to become family through our children, and I sincerely hope to maintain a peaceful and respectful relationship. If there's anything I've done that caused offense, I will correct it. But please, for the sake of our children, let's not escalate things unnecessarily. Humph, if you were capable of such humble behavior, you should have shown it from the beginning. Had you approached our bank for financing with that level of courtesy, I would have been much more willing to face you pleasantly. But I'm already convinced you harbor a deep-rooted arrogance that can't be hidden.
Just because you're bowing your head in panic now that I'm confronting you doesn't mean I'll be easily fooled.
The only reason I'm accepting Samantha as part of our family is because Tyler insists on marrying her. But her relatives, that's another story. Especially someone like you with such a questionable background and a suspicious route to entrepreneurship. I cannot allow a man like that to act as one of my family. From those words, I realized Thomas had thoroughly investigated my background. He seemed to view my path, working as a freelancer after university and suddenly founding a company at 30 as suspicious and irregular. These days, it's not unusual for students to launch startups even while still in school. But to someone like Thomas, a man of my generation, not entering a company and becoming a president at such a young age seemed unnatural, untrustworthy even. Had this been a business setting, I could have insisted that my achievements should speak for themselves, not my past. But this wasn't business. Thomas was examining me as the father of his son's bride, and I couldn't afford to push back the way I would in negotiations. It's true that I didn't join a company after university and instead worked independently, eventually starting my own business. I understand that this may not align with your values, but I've never been involved in anything illegal or shady. Still, I realize I cannot fully erase your doubts today. So after Tyler and Samantha are married, I will avoid participating in family gatherings and keep our connection as in-laws as discreet as possible. I hope you can accept that as a compromise. I assume Thomas feared someone of questionable background like me might linger too close and try to exploit his status as a bank executive. So I hoped that if I vowed not to act as a relative, it might ease his suspicions somewhat. Well, it's not like you said anything I hadn't already assumed, but if you're making that promise yourself, then it carries some weight. So you won't be attending the wedding reception, correct?
What?
You just said you would avoid participating in family gatherings. The wedding reception is the most public one of them all. It's only logical to cancel your attendance there first. Surely you wouldn't go back on your freshly spoken vow. I only said I wouldn't behave like a relative after they're married. Not attending my daughter's wedding reception is unthinkable. Huh. So that's your true nature. You offer a gesture of compromise, but when pressed, you immediately backtrack to protect your own interests. Just what I'd expect from someone who graduated from a mid-tier university and skipped entering the workforce before starting a company. That aggressive loan negotiation of yours was just another bluff, wasn't it? At that moment, I finally understood that Thomas held a deep-seated animosity toward me, and that no matter how much I yielded, he would never accept me as part of his family. If you insist on attending the reception, go ahead, but stay out of the spotlight. If you make a scene, I'll remove you by force if necessary. If you want to watch your daughter's big day to the end, stay in the shadows and behave yourself. With that, Thomas turned and walked away. I stood there in shock, unable to process the depth of hostility I had just encountered. There's no salvaging my personal relationship with Thomas, but at least he seems to like Samantha. If staying quiet at the reception is all it takes to ensure her wedding goes smoothly, then I'll accept that. Focusing only on Samantha, I resolved to avoid drawing any attention and do nothing provoke Thomas's anger during the reception. At that point, I had accepted every demand he had thrown at me, and I clung to the faint hope that he wouldn't push it any further. That's why I had no idea Thomas was already planning a public humiliation for me at the wedding. The day of the reception arrived. I visited Samantha in her dressing room and saw her in her wedding gown. She reminded me so much of her mother in her youth that I had to fight back tears. Watching her surrounded by friends, smiling and receiving their blessings, I was filled with satisfaction. I stepped outside the venue, looked up at the sky, and told my wife in heaven, I fulfilled my role. As the opening time approached, I greeted guests at the entrance and entered last after confirming that everyone had gone in, though Thomas had warned me to stay discreet. I had already planned to be as invisible as possible. Even without that, the stars of the day were, of course, the bride and groom. I would be content just watching them from afar. But as I approached the family seating area, I couldn't believe my eyes. Each seat had a name tag printed in advance to avoid confusion. Mine should have read Stephen Mitchell. However, what I saw there was not my name, but the words loser dad. If it had simply been a typo or the wrong name altogether, I wouldn't have cared. However, it was clear that this childish insult, loser dad, couldn't have appeared by accident, and it had undoubtedly been planted deliberately by someone with malicious intent. Those around me waiting for me to sit down saw the shift in my expression and quickly noticed a name tag, causing a stir. One of the staff, alerted by the commotion, came over and noticed the tag. I heard a muffled gasp. How could this happen? Upon closer inspection, it was clear this wasn't some handwritten prank. It was printed exactly like the others. The staff member who gasped had probably realized right away that this was part of the official print batch, not a last-minute joke. So, someone tampered with the data before printing, and only a few people could have done that. As I muttered this to myself, I heard a voice. Well, what a surprise. You know, back in the day, it wasn't uncommon for digital text to get scrambled. I guess things like that still happen, huh? The voice belonged to Thomas. The moment I saw the name tag, I had already suspected him. The venue staff could have altered the data, for sure, but who else would have a motive to humiliate me like this? And now, standing in front of me with a smug grin, Thomas was toying with the tag like it was nothing. As the groom's father, he could have easily told the staff that there was a mistake in the guest list and provided a correction to replace my name. Everyone else was pale with shock, but Thomas alone wore a pleased expression, confirming my suspicions beyond any doubt. Dad. Suddenly, I heard my daughter's voice. Samantha and Tyler had left the stage, drawn by the commotion. They both stared, speechless, at the tag in Thomas's hand. Who would do something like this? This is awful. Who had access to the name list? Find out and hold them responsible. Even though we were in the middle of the wedding reception, Samantha's eyes were welling with tears, and Tyler was visibly agitated. I quickly approached them and said, "This is nothing. If you two cause a scene now, it could ruin the entire day. But this is just unacceptable." That's right. There's no way we can just ignore such an insult to Samantha's father. As they were struggling to calm down, Thomas spoke to them with a smile. Well, whether this counts as an insult is open to interpretation. What? Dad, what are you talking about? If this isn't an insult, what is it? There are words that are offensive in one culture, but commonplace in another. Loser dad could be seen as a term of endearment, depending on how you hear it. After all, this Stephen here is a man who graduated from a mid-tier university, wandered around without a job, and somehow started a company through suspicious means. To those of us who rose through proper channels, educated with dignity and honor, he might seem like a loser dad who clawed his way up from the back alleys. So perhaps this name tag was a touch of humor and an amusing little act by someone with a sense for satire. That's nonsense. I agree. I don't accept that kind of twisted sense of humor. Humor is subjective. Whether you accept it or not is beside the point, and it remains a possibility. Either way, there's no need to take such a light-hearted gesture so seriously. Let's continue with the ceremony as planned. With that, Thomas gently placed the loser dad name tag back in front of my seat and said, "Go ahead, Stephen," flashing a cold smile. I immediately understood that if I resisted now, Thomas would brand me a petty man who couldn't even take a joke and insult me further. If an argument broke out here, it would ruin the reception beyond repair. So, I clenched my teeth and sat down at the seat where Thomas had placed the tag. He grinned with satisfaction and said, "Stephen truly is a big man." With this, people may stop calling him a flash-in-the-pan starter president, and returned to his seat. Samantha and Tyler looked furious and were about to protest. But I told them, "Please, for my sake, let it go for now. Don't ruin this day." They both seemed to realize in that moment that Thomas had indeed tampered with the name tag data. Thomas's goal had likely been to publicly humiliate me and showcase my submission, to prove to everyone that I was beneath him and powerless to resist. Through this, Thomas likely intended to make it clear to everyone that I was in a position where I couldn't oppose him no matter what, like a subordinate, and to establish himself as being in absolute control. Throughout the rest of the reception, he was in high spirits, flaunting his authority as he mingled with guests. And so I endured the entire reception with loser dad placed in front of me. Despite the humiliation, I found solace in the fact that I hadn't ruined Samantha's special day. I imagined my wife in heaven smiling wryly and offering me some comfort for what I had endured. The moment the reception ended and the guests began to leave, so did the end of my patience. Thomas, having greeted most of the guests, was now lounging on a sofa in the hall, arms spread wide, basking in the afterglow. When he saw me approach, he simply said, "Oh," and crossed his legs arrogantly. Any decent person, upon seeing the bride's father approach, would stand and exchange kind words. But Thomas stayed seated, emphasizing the gap in status, as if a master addressing a servant. Clearly, he believed he had utterly subdued me today and intended to treat me this way from now on. That was a good reception. I appreciate that you understood the humor behind the name tag and kept quiet. If you continue to remember your place, we can have a smooth family relationship moving forward. Until the end of the reception, I had smiled no matter what he said, just to keep the peace. But now that my duty of presenting Samantha's marriage to the world was complete, I had fully switched modes. A smooth relationship with you going forward? You must be joking. I have no intention of being related to a man who went so far as to stamp an insult on my name tag. What? Are you drunk? Do you realize what you're saying? I'm fully aware, Thomas, respected executive of a major bank. I've treated you as my daughter's father-in-law and made every possible concession. Yet, you continue to belittle and humiliate me. I've had enough. From this point forward, I refuse any form of association with you. I see. So, this is a declaration of severance. Not just as family, but professionally, too. You clearly have no idea how much influence I have in the banking world. If I so much as make a call, no bank will ever loan to your company again. Is that so? Well, then you may want to know that I've already given instructions to withdraw all funds we manage from your bank. Huh? Are you trying to make me laugh? Even if your little company pulled its money, the impact would be negligible. Just then, Thomas's phone rang. Still chuckling, he answered, but after a few moments, his smile vanished. He began muttering, "What do you mean? And that can't be." After ending the call, he looked at me as if seeing something unimaginable. Emergency call from the bank, I assume. They must have told you that several $50 billion is about to be pulled and that you're urgently needed back for a countermeasure meeting, right? How did you know that? Don't tell me you're connected to the fund behind that withdrawal. I'm very much involved because I'm the one who created that fund. Years ago, the man who built a company through methods you never understood and always looked down on as suspicious, began working in financial systems as well. Once I developed a solid understanding of finance, I hired professionals and launched an investment fund division. It turned out to be far more profitable than expected. So I spun it off as a separate company. That fund has since grown into one of the world's leading investment firms and has been channeling a substantial amount of capital into your bank. I believe the total had reached around $50 billion. That's impossible. If you had access to that kind of money, why did you ask us for a loan? Because if I used that money directly, my employees would lose their edge. If all I cared about was making money, I'd have retired long ago. But I continue working to honor the memory of my wife and the years we built this company together, and to keep a record of the work I did to raise my daughter. And yes, helping my hardworking employees grow their skills and contribute to society is a key goal. Back to the point, I will no longer associate with you as family or in business. Not a single cent of my fund's capital will remain with your bank. Please return to your office and deal with the fallout as you see fit. But no matter what measures you take, my decision is final. Wait, there's no need to jump to conclusions. We're family now. We should support each other. Oh, So now you need the help of the loser dad. If you wish to call yourself an elite, then act like one and carry your pride through to the end. With that, I turned my back on Thomas and walked toward the exit. When he reached out, trying to cling to me from behind, I gently brushed him off. He collapsed to the floor, limp and defeated, and didn't follow me any further. News of my fund's massive withdrawal began spreading among investors that very night. Other funds and individual investors, reacting to the movement of such a large sum of money, began pulling their assets as well. The stock price of Thomas's bank plummeted. The bank convened an emergency meeting and requested that I return the funds, but I refused to entertain the request. Eventually, word reached the bank about what Thomas had done to me at the wedding reception. Once it was confirmed that his actions had triggered this crisis, the board of directors and shareholders were furious. Under intense criticism, Thomas was stripped of all his titles, denied his severance pay, and fired. The story spread throughout the financial industry. No firm would dare make the foolish move of hiring someone who had enraged a major investment fund. Thomas's return to the public stage was now all but impossible. Meanwhile, Tyler and Samantha were happily living their lives together, often invited me over for meals. I'll never forgive my father for what he did to you at the wedding. He's unemployed now and stays at home, but I have no intention of reaching out. Unless he sincerely bows his head to you and apologizes, I won't see him again, and I won't let him see Samantha either. Tyler expresses anger and apologizes to me time and again for his father's actions. Just as he said, if someday Thomas were to come to me of his own accord with genuine remorse and apology, I might consider having at least a minimal relationship with him as family. Everything depends on what Thomas chooses to do. My fund has since moved its capital to another bank and resumed operations, continuing to generate significant profits. But I have no intention of living a life of ease with those profits. As long as my body allows, I'll continue working in my original field, programming, and apply my skills to contribute to society. I've entrusted the role of protecting my daughter to her husband, Tyler. From now on, I will quietly watch over them from a distance, offering support only when truly needed. And somehow, I feel my wife in heaven is watching over me, approving the path I've chosen,